Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Personal and Professional Best. I'm your host, Pat Flood. Today, we're joined by somebody who perfectly embodies what it means to live without compromise, Rick Hale. Everyone wants two things in life: to become their personal and professional best and to become rich. The truth is, achieving both is possible if we stop settling and choose the best definition of what it truly means to be rich. Let's face it, we all settle, more or less, but the best among us settle less. Rick's journey in the real estate industry and his personal development are profound examples of this. He captured his insights in his book, Stop Settling, Finding Clear Directions for a Regret-Free Life, guiding us all to strive for more and truly excel. Today on Personal and Professional Best, Rick joins us to share his story and inspire all of us to write our best life stories. Rick Hale, welcome to Personal and Professional Best.
Thanks, Pat.
I'm so happy to spend time with you today because I've known you for a long time. You've got a book. You're in a new season of life. There's just so much going on. But the purpose of our program, because you're a leader and someone I respect an awful lot as a leader, years ago, we developed about 8 years ago, Personal and Professional Best, because in the end, it's not about mortgages, it's about real estate. It's about the development of a human being. And that is true for parents, and it's true in the workplace. And what's true is everybody that I've ever met, they want to be their best. Unfortunately, most don't ever get there. That's what you wrote about to encourage it. That's what this program's about. So we're in good shape because we've got a guy who's become his best. Close to
working towards it.
Yeah, that's right. And knows awful lot about it. But before we get there, I want our audience to get to know you a little bit. So if you would, tell us your story.
All right. So it's in the book. The first chapter is pretty much my story growing up. And what I want people to hear and feel is that where you start is not where you end up. And that sometimes things that appear bad are really awesome. And that those are the things that shape your perspective. Those are the things that energize and inspire if you lean into it in that way. And then I'm a fan of silver linings, that every perceived negative has a lesson, opportunity. And maybe you're just a cast member in somebody else's play or part of their story, and you were just part of their story. And so for me, my parents were divorced at one. My mom met my dad in Austria. She ran as far away from her family as possible and met my dad in first semester in college. The youthful age of 19. And immediately I appeared. And what was first a mistake ended up being who sits before you. So there are no mistakes. Once again, I think there are higher powers that were operating, convinced my dad to move back to the States. And he was midway through medical school. And he's an amazing success story all his own today. But at the time, they were young and made decisions young people make and ended up divorced. And my mom remarried, and second father adopted me, and that lasted a few years and was pretty cool. But in the end, after that, my mom was, she was given a life sentence for cancer and supposedly not to live 6 months. She ran to Venezuela and didn't come back for 17 years. I was 10. Ended up with adopted father, stepmother. And unfortunately, a year into that, I was a little more than I guess they could handle and ended up in military school, boarding school. And that was probably the saddest year of my life because I woke up, I cried myself to sleep and woke up really feeling unlovable. And I think there are a lot of people that aren't certain of their capacity and they're truly loved at the core. And that's a gift I want to provide for young people inside of my story to say, hey, wherever you are today isn't where you're going to be tomorrow. If you lean into the silver linings aspect of this is part of the journey and it's part of your book that you're going to write one day. And so transition from military school, my mom was dating a guy who was setting up offshore corporations in Curacao and Aruba. And this was a tax sheltering strategy. And long story short, I ended up living with him and his elderly parents in Massachusetts. And they were a Polish immigrant family. And for the first time in a while, I felt real commitment and love. When I wasn't in school, I would travel with him to cool, faraway places. And for the first time in my life, I saw what it would look like to be affluent and have capacity and explore and kind of have this unlimited thinking mentality. The unfortunate reality there is that Uncle Sam has this problem with people who avoid taxes. And then he ended up in prison for 5 years for corporate crime, and sent me back to Athens, Georgia, which that was about 1.5 years of my life. And I lived with my grandparents, and my grandfather was a real estate developer at that point in his life. And I saw the value of real estate and how investing and developing really paid dividends. And that was inspiring. Again, not a particularly awesome person. So he sent me to Venezuela. Remember, my mom left when I was 10. I'm now 16, and I find myself in the Andes Mountains. She wasn't in the coolest parts of Venezuela. She unfortunately remarried, unfortunately, to a farmer and a mechanic. Okay guy, for sure. But there were oxen roaming the field. This, coming from the States, where the land of milk and honey, this was sobering. I was in the mountains, sitting on top of this mountain, looking down at a 3-street village with strung lights for lights. They didn't even have legitimate lights at night, either cobblestone or dirt for roads, and scratching my head, asking myself, how did I get here?
It's a long way from Athens.
Who am I and how did I get here?
Right.
And here's the gift, though. Here's when this is the part of the story where everything changed. My mom and I were not quite connecting as you might think at a reunion state at 16. I was angry and she didn't understand me, and we just didn't know each other. But a missionary came through town, the little village, named Johnny. And Johnny, spoke Spanish. I didn't speak a word of Spanish, by the way. I hadn't had that class yet. And he asked my mom if I would travel with him. And he was a traveling missionary, an evangelist. And he had this truck, Pat, that it was a box truck converted into it had 2 bunk beds, a projection screen, and one side that was kind of cut like an old tuna fish can you could split open. And he would show these really poorly made Jesus, movies about Jesus and, your Savior. And he just went town to town along the Colombian border serving the poorest of the poor. Wow. And so I maybe naively accepted the challenge of going with him. My mom's like, hey, why don't you just go with Johnny for a while and get away? And I'm like, anywhere but here. Like, sure, why not? I jump in the truck, Pat. This is the most comical moment I can remember.
How old are you now?
I'm 16. I jump in the truck with
you're
it.
A missionary at 16?
No, I'm not. I'm just a bystander. I'm an innocent bystander in the line of fire of, doing God's work. But I get in this truck and he looks over at me and he goes, that's what I heard. Okay, I know it was Spanish. It was probably like, hola, ¿cómo estás? I love you, or something loving and kind. But I was like, where are we going first? And he just went, whatever, that's what it was like. It might as well have been speaking Martian. And I knew I was in trouble in that moment. And so here's what happened. 6 weeks later, I was on the road with this guy for 6 weeks. And I witnessed the poorest of the poor. I witnessed people with, no electricity. I witnessed dirt roads. I witnessed stone soup. Remember the story? It was like stone soup. If we got a hot meal, it was often out of one big bowl over an open fire, one big vat, and with some arepas that they made up, like the bread version to sort of augment the mostly watered down soup. And I also remember how stifling hot it was. And we were also checked at, every 20 miles we get pulled over with, guys with machine guns. And he'd have to explain who I was. And I would just stand there and pray they didn't open fire. They got mirrors under the truck. I mean, the drug trade was alive and well. But at 16, I wish every child, some people were like, wow, that must have been, fill in the blank. It was magical because I became a different person. I metamorphosized into someone who recognized how blessed and lucky I was. And I escaped the pity party of my situation and realized all of those things led me to that place, which is exactly where I was supposed to be in that moment. And I also came to realize that, if the value of a fan, like if we didn't have to sleep in that truck with no AC and we got to sleep in a hammock in someone's house with a fan that rotated, I remember wanting to just like hug it like my first girlfriend and make that, you laugh.
No,
all of a sudden I'm like,
I grew up in Miami.
Things you take for granted. I quit taking things for granted. And I realized that my absolute worst day was someone's best day there. Yeah. They would trade even right now. Yeah. And so after 6 weeks there, I came back to my mom's place, and a couple months later, I knew I needed to get back to the States. And the story didn't get better for a minute because I wasn't able to find a place to live. Everyone that, through multiples of divorces. Everyone always thought I would be better served with a different parent because I had so darn many choices. And at the end of the day, no one owned the responsibility. And my mom wasn't coming back from Venezuela. And I was, my grandmother, so one of my favorite awesome people, she lost her leg in the war, and man, just an amazing woman, immigrant. And she took me to the church, the local church in Athens when I came back. And I had no answers, man. I had nowhere to live. I'm 16. I'm like, I can't really get a job in an apartment yet. Like, that didn't seem feasible. And the guy's best idea was maybe the children's home in Atlanta, Methodist Children's Home. So I interviewed to go to the children's home, and they accepted me. And it was the most joyous, inspiring moment I could remember. And most people probably think, well, how horrible. Like, no, I just witnessed the worst of the worst. This is like the Ritz-Carlton. It's a warm bed with AC.
And a fan.
And fans.
Air conditioning.
I ultimately didn't end up going. One of my adopted father just generously took me in, and I ended up finishing school in Conyers, and it was a beautiful thing and a great landing pad and a great way to move forward. But, when I came back to the States, man, we live in the land of milk and honey. I think people underestimate the potential here. You could be having to do anything. I didn't want to just, you hear the stories about people wanting to kiss the ground. I wanted to eat the dirt. Give me a bowl of that. So that's kind of
instead of stone soup.
Yeah, I'd eat the dirt. I was so inspired and excited to be back. And it doesn't mean I immediately took off like a rocket ship.
Sure.
But my general demeanor was, I can have it when I'm ready and when I do the work.
Choices in life wind up either getting us to the destination where we're the best version of ourselves, or they don't. And some things happen to us, like you just described, the series of circumstances growing up that you can't even make up, and they're not good, and no parent would want them for their child. But then you made choices along the way, and you wind up writing a book, building a great business, being a great parent, influencer, leader in the marketplace. And I think for all of the people that are viewing today that have had pain, loss, been abandoned, welcome to the club, because that is mostly people's story. Yeah. And then it's how we react to those things that happen to us in life. So there's our choices and the other choices of other people that affect us, which all those choices you did not get to make wound up affecting you, but you chose best. You chose to pursue. You didn't settle. You chose to pursue, and you wound up writing what has now become a really great story. I think we could spend like the next 2 hours digging into each one of those things you just talked about, because I wanted to ask you a couple of times, are you making this stuff up? You can't do this stuff.
You couldn't make this up.
What a cool thing that it wound up being Athens, right? Yeah.
Athens is a glorious place, man.
Go Dogs.
Go Dogs.
Yeah.
I'm hardcore. Champions. Hardcore to it's in my blood, man. It's a beautiful place to live.
So tell me how you overcame. And how you overcame all of these things. Like, who was the person, or what was the event that kept you continuing to pursue, rather than feel sorry for yourself and just giving in and giving up?
So there were a number of, I don't think you need, in fact, I think perfect's overrated, and I don't think anyone should pursue perfection, because you'll never arrive, you'll never achieve, and you'll always feel disappointment. For me, it was always about progress. And there was also circumstances and key moments where I think my higher power delivered exactly what my heart needed, so that I've had the will not to give up. And I think the first big experience, when I visited Venezuela the first time, when my grandparents and mother, she had just moved there. So I did go once when I was 10. And my grandparents took me to this hot springs. And my grandmother, remember, she lost her leg. She was run over by a train. That's in the book. You should read it. Trying to escape the bombing of a train station in Munich. And my grandfather carried her 6 miles, broke into a veterinarian clinic, cauterized her leg, saved her life.
Wow. Oh,
ridiculous. Like, what a ridiculous story. I can't imagine. I've had some trials and tribulations, but that one hasn't shown up, thankfully. And while I was there, I went down to the pool, and this was the age when parents just let you roam free, man. They give you like $1, go buy some soda. It was a Bolivar, whatever their currency was. I bought a grape soda and some crackers. I remember it like it was yesterday. I sit down by the pool after swimming a little bit, and it's a hot spring pool and natural. And these 4 kids come running through the woods, and they jump in 1, 2, 3, 4, back to back to back. And first one pops up, swims to the edge. Second one pops up, swims to the edge. Third one pops up, fourth one didn't pop up. And there was only one other couple at the pool, an adult couple, and their small baby. So they were young, they were in their 20s. And I can only assume they couldn't swim, because I looked over at them when I realized this kid's drowning. Like, I'm 10, I don't have training. I was a good swimmer because my mom threw me in the pool at 6 months, and when we lived in an apartment, and made everybody there angry thinking she was abusing me. Later on, I'm a pretty darn good swimmer. Sink or swim, man, that was her attitude. But ultimately, I made the decision I had to do something, and I dove in the pool. I grabbed him by the legs. I did all the things you're like, if you read How to Save a Drowning Victim, I did the opposite. But I did what I knew to do. I took a big gulp of air. I dove deep. I grabbed him by the legs. I lifted him to the surface. He was yanking most of my hair out. Excruciatingly painful, but I managed to push him to the shore, the edge of the pool. The adult thankfully took him out of the pool because I was exhausted. And I just remember them speaking rapidly in Spanish. I'm sure it was cool things, but I went back to my grandmother and grandfather, and I told my grandfather. My grandfather dismissed it as, yeah, whatever. My grandmother puts her hands on my face, and she says, "You're a gift from God. He has great things for you."
Wow.
And I think we all need to be affirmed. And for me at 10, man, I didn't know the road ahead. I didn't know my challenge. I didn't know the perceived detriment. But that was probably the biggest moment of my life, because one, I adopted the belief that there was a God, and then I did have purpose. And so that was huge.
Your grandmother did that simple thing that is arguably the greatest act in history, which is to tell you that there is a God and that you're worth something and you're valuable and you're going to write a great story, provided you believe it. And I'm so grateful that you just shared that. My story was my dad doing essentially the same thing, entirely different circumstances. I didn't dive in and save anyone, but he did teach us how to swim. My older brother was the first one that he threw him. He's 3 years older than me. He threw him in the middle of the pool, and I thought, God, I thought you were a good father and you loved your children. But then I saw my destiny, right? I knew that my day was coming, but we all learned to swim as well. But the bigger thing is, when my mom left when I was 8 years old, read the note on the table, my dad came home that night. He said, to forgive your mom, and she's the only mom you'll ever have. So we both were blessed by having somebody who voiced into our life what's true. And that launched us at some point down the road. Obviously, it took a minute for you, and it took a minute for me. I've seen pictures of you, by the way, in your older teenage life and early college.
My rock and roll days.
Your rock and roll days.
Those are fun.
I had my own rock and roll story. I want to ask you a question about definition of success. My good friend, Andy Stanley, I asked him this question because I was going to interview John Maxwell, who you know very well. And I said, Andy, if you had to interview John, what's the one question you would ask? And he said, what's the definition of success in life? And it was so compelling, not only his answer, but for me, most people, and you talk about it in terms of purpose, and it can be purpose, mission, definition of success, but most people, absent asking that question, they just go from event to event, an event life, trying to get what they want based on what they need right now or what they really want. But that doesn't really lead them to where they want to go. So I want to ask you the question, what is your, Rick Hale, definition of success in life?
I think it's living into your potential and doing the best you can with what you have every day, and not squandering resources and not falling prey to the energy of the world. Because if you let the energy of the world dictate your future, man, it's going to be random and probably not where you intended or want to be. I think success, early in my career, it was achievement and it was accolades, and it was probably, hey, and I was just trying to prove I could. I don't think I was trying to, and I learned this about myself. I don't actually have to win every game I play. I just don't want to lose. And so I think with that adopted spirit, that made it easy to bring people along. And I think success is now more about significance. And that means bringing people along with you and succeeding with people. And, if you asked me 25, 30 years ago when I embarked on my real estate journey that one day I would be a part of an enterprise that had 1,500 agents that did $3 billion in volume and 10 or 12,000 home sales in a metropolitan market, I don't think I could have bought it or believed it. And so And when people go, how did you do it? I didn't do it. We did it.
Yeah.
And as soon as I recognize, okay, what's my core genius and how do I accentuate and become the best version of the things that are not necessarily natural, but I have that gift. Yeah. And then how do I augment and outsource and subcontract all of the other pieces and parts that don't favor my gifts so that we're a whole person and a whole being and a whole organization that has capacity with unlimited thinkers. That's the secret.
Well, that's why we're here, really, to make sure that just like your grandmother, my father deposited that seed in our life. And it doesn't matter, as you said, where you're currently at. It matters that the seed finally takes hold and that you wind up living out the potential that you have to be your best. Going through this definition of success, when I asked John said that the people that know me best would love and respect me the most.
Yeah.
And it was so simple, came off his tongue so easy, and he had defined it years and years earlier than that. I had personally defined mine when I was a very young guy in business. And mine was that I would leave everyone I came in contact with better, so that the next exchange I'd have intention. And it didn't matter whether or not they cared about me leaving them better. It didn't matter whether or not they were prepared for me to leave them better. It mattered that I was going to have that exchange. And it's interesting listening to your story. When we cross paths with people who aren't right, and that happens a lot.
Right.
If we stopped and asked them what's their story, we might find out some things that would inform us so that we could invest in them in a way that would actually leave them better. So,
yeah.
you and
that's that affirming thing. If you can affirm somebody, and it's hard to see yourself without the reflection of another human helping you see yourself. Yep. And so that's the gift of what you just said. Leaving people better is seeing things in others that they haven't found or discovered yet.
If you don't have a definition of success, if you don't have a specific purpose or mission, I so encourage you to stop what you're doing and build one. And that the one that you would build wouldn't benefit you. It would benefit taking your gift, and it would benefit everyone else that you cross paths with, because that's what life really is about. We're both believers.
Yeah.
So Jesus, when you think about it, they asked Jesus, what's up with you? And he said, well, basically, I didn't come to be the typical king and be served. I came to serve. And his whole life was about serving, about sacrificing, about forgiving, which wouldn't benefit him. But of course it did. Greatest story in history unfolded as a result of it. So it's a great example for all of us that if you live trying to get stuff, and most of us do. I mean, you wake up in the morning, you go, what do I want? I want money, a lot of it. I want a lot of stuff. So I have to have storage places to put all my stuff, right?
You got to stack your stuff.
Yeah, right. So, and what happens is everybody that's in your life, they realize that you're after money and stuff, and you're not nearly as interesting to them as folks like Rick, who are after bringing about benefit for everyone else that's in their life. So
you said something interesting, though. So if you want to be more interesting, be more interested. Yeah. It's one of the things I learned early. Ask Great better point. Questions. Well, that's how people know you care. And until they know you care, they aren't listening.
Yeah, I know you play guitar. I don't. God, there's certain things in life I'm just not very capable at. And I remember going into my first computer science class in college, and the professor explained the syllabus, and I raised my hand and said, was there another class we're supposed to take before this?
The precursor to the precursor.
I'm believing now at the answer that there isn't, because God built me to do some things, but this is not it, okay? I've been asking my son to help me with guitar forever. I know you're really very good at it, but I think, the thing is, be best for something, a mission or a purpose, and then you'll be best at something as well.
Yeah.
But be best for it, because if you stay locked and loaded on that purpose for you and mission for me and definition of success for all of us, you'll wind up continuing to pursue all the right things, which will benefit people. Yeah. Who was it your grandma? Who's the most influential person or people that did or said something that affected you?
So again, there were a number of touch points. It wasn't consistent, which, I think sometimes the price of privilege is extreme, and that having it easy is not the answer. I think it's the rub. It's the need to prove, the need to solve, cure, and fix yourself. Like, that's the journey. That's a journey worth retelling, and stories that'll evolve if you lean into it. But when the fellow I lived with for 2 years in 7th and 8th grade in Massachusetts went to prison, there were a number of things I learned. One was just unlimited thinking and big thinking. And I also realized the world is a much bigger place than my myopic, small town mentality until then. And then on top of that, I remember him being really clear that money's only good for the good that it does. So even though he was doing this really robust, financially rewarding business, whether considered legal or not, it's irrelevant. He kind of had that mentality. You can be, have, and do, again, anything. And after he was released from prison, I was right out of college, a couple of years removed. And by all, I had the scoreboard, and I was checking boxes. I owned a house at 24. Wow. I had 3 roommates. I understood house hacking before it was a thing. They were paying all of my mortgage, and I was getting the tax write-off and the appreciation. I was a fan of real estate, let's just put it that way. And I had a motorcycle, a Jeep. I was in a band. I was growing my hair out. And he took me to breakfast. He visited, and I was expecting him to be like, oh my God, look what you've become. You're freaking awesome. And I got kind of the opposite. And it was a bit cold, and it felt harmful and hurtful at the time when he just said, I know you think you're killing it, but it's not about where you are, it's where you could be. Mm. And he said, basically, you suffer a distinct lack of failure in your life.
Wow.
And in that moment, I was offended. And then over time, it's funny how when people you genuinely respect and love tell you something that matters, it sticks. And so that's where there was trust, and I believed, and I carried that around for a while. And it didn't, again, it's like Ernest Hemingway wrote a book, I think, Where the Sun Rises, and there's a character in the book who goes bankrupt. And this character was asked, how did you become bankrupt? He said, 2 ways, slowly, then suddenly. And I think that's the part people miss, is that's how success occurs too. And it's evolution, not always revolution. You have to have an immediate thought that creates action. But some things take time. They've got to, it's a crock pot and not a microwave. But if you don't know what your goal is and you're not clear in where you're going, it's impossible to chart that path and to have progress favor your energy and your sense of purpose and potential. And so I think you have to know what you're fighting for. That's really the first step. And so with that resonant energy, you're not failing enough. I think subconsciously, Pat, I took on the goal and role of, I'm going to give it all I've got. And if I fail, I'll dust off and try again. And that's where, honestly, big growth showed up. And at 30, child on the way, newly married. I'm like, this band gig, man, you said I'm a great guitarist. Truth is, I'm an average guitarist who tries really hard because it's in my heart and soul. But I recognized at 30 that this dream of music and the music business wasn't going to fulfill my financial goals. And I'd never created enough margin to live the life that I really, really dreamed of. And so I had to pick a different path, and real estate ended up being that, and quickly figured out, leading was something that filled my heart, and organizational structure and strategy, but more important are the relationships with the people inside the ecosystem. That fed my soul. And that made big possible, because it's not just me, it's the concentric circle around that culture of contribution.
Thank you for tuning in today for the first half of my conversation with Rick Hale. Today, Rick shared not just his professional achievements in real estate, but also he gave us a glimpse into the deeply personal challenges he's overcome to get here. From his early days, marked by his personal trials, to his ascent in the real estate sector, Rick's story is a vivid illustration of our program's core belief that personal development and professional success are not mutually exclusive, but are intimately intertwined. Some key takeaways from today's discussion include the importance of resilience, the impact of personal history on professional growth, and the power of positive transformation. Rick's journey encourages us all to strive for our personal and professional best, no matter where we start. Join us in the next episode, where we will explore more about Rick's philosophy on life, the lessons he's learned, and his advice for anyone looking to follow in his footsteps. Until then, keep striving to be your best self in every aspect of your life. Best is waiting. Meet you there.